Ronaldo Basic, and I'm going to talk on introduction and theory. Introduction. In this experiment, we conducted an experiment to study the free and false vortex. There are three main objectives that we want to know based on the result that we get from this experiment. The first objective is we want to study what is the phenomena that's related to a free and false vortex. The second objective is to know what is the surface profile of a free vortex and its relationship with velocity. The last objective was to study the surface profile of a false vortex and the relationship with angular velocity. In this experiment, we are using an equipment that was called Vortex free and false vortex model FM24. This equipment was designed to produce a free and false vortex, and where we use different type of orifice to make full analysis of the flow rate that flow through the orifice. The turbulent flow fluids the spinning is what we know as a vortex, where for free force vortex, it was formed through the water that flowed through central hole in the base of a tank. And for force vortex, it was caused by external force such as impeller, where we using a rotating plate that with addition of a pedal. Theory. As we all know that the turbulent flow fluids spinning is called as a vortex. Based on our study, we know that the speed of rotation was higher at center and it will be decreasing when it further from the center for free vortex, while for force vortex at the center the speed of rotation is zero, but it will be keep increasing when it move further from the center. It was also known that free force vortex does not require any external force, and the fluid mass rotates due to the conservation of angular momentum. And for force vortex, it is require external force, as mentioned in the introduction, that we use the impeller to make the vortex, and this fluid particle that rotate at constant angular velocity has caused the vortex to be formed.
I am Zaratul Azila binti Mohammed Zaid, and I will explain about the procedure of this experiment and how it has been conducted and also the apparatus being used. This is the apparatus needed. For both experiment, the apparatus is quite the same except for experiment 2, we will be using paddle as a medium for force vortex and needle as a source of measurement. For experiment 1, orifice of different diameters such as 8, 16 and 24 mm were being used. Moving on to procedure, firstly, for every experiment, we will have the general start-up and shut-down procedure. So let us start with general start-up procedure, where the study bench was placed on hydraulic bench and inlet and outlet hose were being set up. Stand of equipment must be adjusted so that it could reach the horizontal position. In experiment 1, starting with 24 mm diameter of orifice, it is placed in base of cylinder tank at the center. Adjust the three-way valve so that water could flow through the 12.55 diameter pipe into the tank. Before that, ensure that output valve is closed. Switch on the pump and slowly open the control valve till the water reach the limit. To maintain the water level, adjust the control valve. Vortex shape will then form and profile measuring gauge is used to measure the vortex diameter. Make sure the sharp point of measuring gauge touch the water surface. Measurement of height can be taken from top of measuring gauge to the bridge, while value of A is measured using distance from the bridge to the water level surface. At depth of 5 mm from the water surface, pitot tube was sink into the water to measure the velocity. H was measured by looking at the depth of pitot tube in the water. By repeating steps before, height and A can be measured by using orifice of 8 mm and 16 mm. Graph can be plotted to show coordinates of vortex profile for all diameter of orifice, and next, calculate the gradient of graph using given formula. To calculate velocity, use V equal to K over R equation. For experiment 2, as the usual, the startup procedure will carry out, and this is where we're going to use paddle that is being put in the cylinder tank, which must be put tightly. Close the control valve before switch on the pump. Then, open the control valve. As to let the water flow out through the 9 mm diameter, adjust the three-way valve so that it could produce the rotating motion. Control the control valve to ensure the water level is constant. After making sure that the water level is constant, use biggest needle and slot into the center of the bridge, and it must touches the water level at the top. To get measurement, use ruler and measure it from the bridge to the top of needle. Reading was taken and needle is brought out to put the other smaller needle and slot into the center of the bridge. Process were repeated to take reading of measurement by slotting it into the other half of the bridge. Measurement for distance between each holes was taken. Use stopwatch to count the revolution that the pedal needs in 60 seconds. It was then count in revolution per minute. Switch on the pump and let the control valve open. By making sure that all the water flows out, steps can be repeated at different water level to get another measurement. End of experiment. Proceed with the general shutdown procedure by closing the valve and switch off the pump. Remove pedal, orifice and other equipment from cylindrical tank.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Azimran. So I will talk about the result and the conclusion that our team managed to get based on the free and forced vortex experiment. So first of all, the result that we managed to get for the free vortex experiment, which is the experiment 1. So based on the diameter of 8 mm and also the distance from the bridge to the surface of 205 mm, based on the table shown, this is the data that our team managed to get. So based on the data, this is the graph that we managed to plot, which is indicates the pressure heads against the 1 over r squared. Next, based on the diameter of orifice 8 mm and also the distance from bridge to surface of 205 mm, the table shown the comparison between the actual and also the theoretical velocity that we managed to get by applying the equation to get those actual and theoretical velocity. So based on the actual and theoretical velocity, this is the graph that we managed to plot. Based on the graph, it can be seen that there is slightly different of graph plot for both actual and theoretical velocity. So next is also the free vortex experiment, but this time there is a slightly change between the diameter and also the distance, which this time the diameter of the orifice is 16 mm, while the distance is 204 millimeters. So the table shown the data that we managed to get. So next one is the pressure hits against the 1 over r squared for the 16 millimeter diameter. So the next table shown the actual velocity and also the theoretical velocity for the diameter of the orifice 16 millimeters. Also by applying the same equation for both like before to get the data for the velocities. So this one is the graph of velocity against the radius of the profile for the 16 millimeter orifice diameter. Last but not least, the free vortex experiment, but this time the diameter is increased to 24 millimeters while the distance is 203 millimeters. So this one is the pressure hits against 1 over r squared for the 24 millimeter diameter, and this one is the table for the actual and also the theoretical velocity. This one is the graph of velocity against the radius of the profile for 24 millimeter orifice diameter. So the next one is the experiment 2, which is the force vortex. The table shown the data that we managed to get based on the experiment and also the apply of the equation that been provided. So the first one is the graph of vortex profile for the first trial. The next one is the graph for the second trial, and lastly the graph of vortex profile for the third trial. So this is the sum of the calculation that will be made in order for us to get the data that we need to fill up based on the table that previously shown.
Hi and Assalamualaikum. My name is Iman Nuraina binti Adnan and I am going to present on the discussion of lab session 2. Vortex is formed when fluid moves in circular motion. Two main types of vortex is known as free and forced vortex. Free vortex occurs naturally due to the relative speed between particles. Different speed between particles causes them to pull each other. This occurs due to the presence of friction, which eventually causes the formation of vortex. Theoretically, free vortex has a radius that inversely proportional to tangential velocity, while forced vortex has a radius that directly proportional to tangential velocity. This indicates that each vortex has a different pattern of surface profile. This experiment consists of two parts, which is experiment 1 and 2. Experiment 1 is conducted to identify the surface profile of free vortex as well as its relationship with velocity, while experiment 2 is conducted to study the surface profile of forced vortex and its relationship with the angular velocity. Experiment 1 is conducted using 3 different orifices varies in diameter of 8 mm, 16 mm, and 24 mm. These orifices were inserted into a hole located at the bottom of container. As the water fills in and reach a certain level where the volume is maintained, the water is forced and pulled down through the orifice by gravity. When the water moves closer to the orifice, the velocity increases. This can be proven from the data obtained for all 3 diameters. Vortex is formed due to radial forces acting on the water. Some factors that plays an important role for radial forces are water pressure, air pressure, and gravity. Orifice with smaller diameter tends to move faster as it requires larger radial forces. In contrast, orifice with larger diameter tends to move slower as the amount of radial forces is much smaller. From the data of 8 mm, 16 mm, and 24 mm diameter of orifice, it can be seen that increase in height of vortex will increase the diameter of vortex profile. This happens due to the natural occurrence of vortex which flow in circular motion down the orifice. As the water moves closer to the orifice, the diameter of the vortex decreases. At this point, the pressure head will increase as the diameter of vortex decreases. This can be proven from the graph of pressure head against 1 over r squared for all three diameters, which clearly shows the same trend for all three diameters. From the graphs, gradient can be obtained from the equation of trend line. This provides more information for us to calculate the theoretical velocity of vortex. However, as the theoretical velocity has been calculated, the value shows a huge difference with the actual reading. This may occur due to some errors in handling the equipment, such as parallax errors in the process of measuring the diameter of vortices. Theoretically, forced vortex can only occur with the presence of external energy. In this experiment, pedal is used as the source of external energy to create forced vortex. According to the data obtained, it can be confirmed that increase in the distance from the center will also increases the height from top of measuring gauge to bridge. In order to maintain the surface profile of forced vortex, a constant amount of energy supply is required. In this experiment, the pedal keeps rotating as long as the experiment is conducted to ensure the measurement of height from top of measuring gauge to the bridge can be done. From the data obtained, the angular velocity increasing from the first trial to the second trial and decreasing from the second trial to the third trial. Supposedly, the reading of angular velocity increasing from the first trial to the third trial. However, due to some error in electrical supply during the experiment, the pedals slow down, which results in lower angular velocity. From the experiment, it can be observed that the surface profile of forced vortex is different compared to free vortex. This happened due to the difference information as the forced vortex requires external energy at the bottom of the container. The surface profile of the forced vortex that has been measured shows a parabolic shape. Surface profile can be observed from the diameter of vortex. As an outcome for experiment 1, increase in velocity will decreases the surface profile of vortex. As for experiment 2, the parabolic shape indicates lower angular velocity. Hence, as the surface profile increases, the angular velocity decreases.
Next is the recommendation for this experiment. There are few recommendations such as the most important thing is eyes must be parallel with ruler's reading scale as to avoid parallax error. This is to ensure that accurate reading can be obtained. Next, constant water level is very important too because different water level may give different results. So, control valve must be controlled while conducting this experiment. For example, in experiment 2, before taking measurement using needle, make sure that the water level is constant. Other than that, reading must be taken when water is at the ready state. Next, sharp point of profile measuring gauge must touch the surface of the water to get the accurate reading of vortex diameter. Lastly, in experiment 2, we have to find the revolution per minute, so one need to set a mark at one point when pedal completed one complete rotation. This is to avoid any confusion as well as to make sure the counts is correct.
Based on the experiment goals, which are to determine the relationship between the velocity and also the angular velocity of both free and forced vortex, as well as the vortex surface profile. The experiment 1, which is the free vortex experiment, showed that as the radius of the orifice increased, the velocity decreased, and the larger orifice diameter result in larger vortex. However, due to human errors such as the parallax error, the product of velocity and radius is not constant as it should be. While in the experiment 2, which is the force vortex. As the angular velocity increase, the height measured from the top of the measuring gauge to the bridge, which is the hinge, is also increased. Because the stream function formed in the force vortex is naturally in parabolic form, which is the curve forms, the slope of the curve increase as the angular velocity increase. In conclusion, it can be summarized that all of the experiment's main goals were met, despite the fact that the results obtained are slightly different from the theoretical calculation that we made. Thank you.